have to say, and more importantly for what you represent, because I think it's the most important thing in the world, which is the cause of freedom. Okay. Now, there was an ancient Greek philosopher, Chrysippus, who said, only the wise can be free. And it's true. And, in our society today, science is very authoritative. Once we had religion was the dominant authority in society, in Western civilization, other civilizations. But today it's science. And those who speak for science speak with great authority. And the question is, does science say humans should be free? Or does science say humans should not be free? Okay. That's the key question, and it's a very important one. And what I'm going to talk today is about a form of pseudoscience, which masquerades as science. Of course, that's the essence of pseudoscience, which claims that humans should not be free, and in many cases shouldn't be alive. And I'm going to discuss it, discuss its origins and its development over time. I'm going to try to refute it in terms of its fundamental assertions, and I'm going to show the consequences of it where it has been believed, and actually to show that most of the human-caused catastrophes of the past 200 years have been caused by this false set of beliefs, masquerading as science. Now, there's an awful lot to talk about in a talk of, how long do I have to talk anyway?
Fast order.
What?
As long as you want.
What? Well, okay, in a talk of
30 minutes?
30 minutes or so. Yeah, well, that's impossible. Okay.
How about 15 to 20 minutes and then...
Okay, well, even half an hour. Okay. But fortunately, I have a book on the subject, which lays it out in detail, Merchants of Despair. And if you find what I have to say is of some interest to you, then after the talk, you can come up and buy them. They're $20. You buy them, I'll sign them. It's a win-win situation. All right. So what is anti-humanism? Anti-humanism is the belief that humans are not creators but destroyers. That there is a pre-existing creation that we are using up. And therefore, that human numbers, activities, and liberties must be severely constrained. And therefore, someone must be empowered to do the constraining. And that last bit is the reason why intellectuals who propound these ideas have never lacked for sponsors. Okay? Because this is a philosophy that justifies tyranny.
Make sure you eat the mic.
Eat the mic. Okay. So, the founding philosopher of anti-humanism, at least that has remained to be famous subsequently, is Thomas Malthus, who wrote circa 1800. Now, Malthus, okay, people here know about Malthus generally. Population expands geometrically, food supply expands arithmetically, and therefore population is always going to outrun food supply, and therefore there'll always be starving people, and that's how it is, and this cannot be fixed, and so forth. And these ideas were used by Malthus and his immediate associates to justify starvation in Ireland and in India. Malthus himself was an employee of the British East India Company, and he was justifying the starvation that they were causing there through massive taxation and rack renting. And one could go on. But it's an interesting fact that at the time that Malthus wrote, the average per capita income in the world in today's money was $180 a year, okay? 50 cents a day. That's the world described in the novels of Victor Hugo and Charles Dickens, where you have people starving to death in the streets of London and Paris, the capitals of the world's leading nations. Okay? Today, the average, and by the way, there was a world population of 1 billion people at the time when Malthus wrote. Today, the world's population is 7 billion, 7 times as much as it was when Malthus wrote. And the average per capita income in the world is about $9,000 a year. Okay, much higher in the United States, it's $45,000 here. But worldwide, the average is 9,000. That's like Mexico or Brazil, okay, Indonesia, Thailand. There are poorer countries in Africa where it's 2,000, okay, but it's 9,000. And so the population has gone up 7 times. The per capita income has gone up 50 times, which is 7 squared, which means that the total product has gone up 350 times, which is 7 cubed. So there has never been a theory more counterfactual than Malthus's.
What's the next thing you got?
Okay. Never. Okay, and if one was to go to more recent times, times that many people here can experience, people here may remember 1968. People say that if you can remember 1968, you really weren't there, but I actually can remember 1968. And there was a bestseller, The Population Bomb, published by Paul Ehrlich. Okay, and he said, here we are. There's 3 billion people in the world, 3.5 billion people in the world. And there's an awful lot of poverty. There are people starving in India and China. And by the year 2000, there's going to be 7 billion people. They'll be starving in the streets. And not only in India and China, but even here in the United States, unless we have a Bureau of Population set up where the government will issue permits for people to have children, so we can control population growth. Now, it's 2016, and there is 7 billion people in the world. It took a little longer than Ehrlich said, but more or less that was true. However, in 1968, the average GDP per capita in the world was about $3,500. Today it's $9,000. So the population did double, and the GDP per capita almost tripled. Okay, so he was wrong. Okay, wildly incorrect. But the amazing thing about this is, okay, anybody can be wrong about the future. We all are frequently wrong about the future. But Ehrlich was also wrong about the past. Because if his theory was correct, that human being was inversely proportional to human numbers, then in 1931, when Ehrlich was born, and the world population was smaller, people should have been richer. Significantly richer in the 1930s than they were in the 1960s, and he would have been there to see it. Okay, but of course we all know, and Ehrlich knew, that people in the 1930s were much poorer than those in the late 60s. Okay, so the theory was just counterfactual, and it remains counterfactual. Now, the question is, first of all, why do people continue to believe a theory that has always been shown to be false? Okay, and and why is it false? Because, okay, look, on a naive level, it would appear to be logical. The more people there are, the less there's going to be to go around. Okay, but the reason why it's false, okay, is several-fold. Number one, people don't just come with a mouth, they come with a pair of hands. Well, if that were all there were to it, it would be a wash. More people, less people, would be the same standard of living. Okay, but they also come with a brain. And the more people there are, and the higher their standard of living is, the more inventions that they're going to make. And inventions are cumulative. And furthermore, what we call resources is a product of human invention. In other words, is land a resource? It was not until people invented agriculture. Is oil a resource? It was not until 1859. Okay, when people invented oil drilling and refining and devices like internal combustion engines, well, first kerosene lamps, then internal combustion engines, that could make use of it. Okay, the uranium was not a resource until we invented nuclear power. Deuterium is not a resource today. It will be once we have fusion power. Okay? So, now, furthermore, the more people there are, the more inventors there are, also the larger the market is. And the larger the market is, the more incentive there is for investors to actually invest in new technologies and mobilize them. Okay? You know, because there's a larger market to sell it to. And of course there's a larger division of labor and so forth to produce the goods as well. But also, you see, we live much better today, not only because of all the people working and inventing and investing today, but because of all the people who did it in the past. I mean, imagine if Malthus had been listened to and there had been half as many people in the world in the 19th century as there actually were. Okay, so they would have used somewhat less coal. Okay, but we're not hurting for the coal that they used. Okay, but half as many people. You can give up either Thomas Edison or Louis Pasteur, take your pick. Either give up electricity or the germ theory of disease, which is the basis of all of modern medicine. Okay, it's up to you. Okay.
I give up canes.
There you go. Okay. So it's wrong. It's wildly wrong because humans are creators. And if you think about it, the idea that humans are destroyers and not creators is manifestly counterfactual. Because if the average person, I mean, there are some people who are destroyers. Adolf Hitler was a destroyer. There are various people who have destroyed much more than they've created. But if the average person on net destroyed more than he or she created, there'd be nothing here. In other words, what you see is the cumulative result of all the creation and destruction that has happened. Okay? So clearly the average person creates more. Okay? Now, but you have this prejudice. Now, we don't have overhead projectors here. Okay, but imagine that I'm projecting a graph and it's a line going like this. Okay, and across the bottom of this line, the x-axis, is the total carbon consumption of the world. Okay, of humanity in fossil fuels. Okay, measured in tons, not per capita, just the total amount. And then the y-axis is GDP per capita. Okay? And what you would see is it just goes up. It's completely linear from 1850 to today, and it goes up enormously, but linearly. But if you take, for example, just my lifetime, I'm 64. I was born in 52. I can remember about as far back as 1957. Okay, in 1957, humanity used a total of about 2.4 billion tons of carbon per year. Okay, today it uses 9 billion tons of carbon per year. In 1957, Sputnik, beep beep, the average GDP per capita in the world was $2,400. Today it's $9,000, as I mentioned. Now you think about this. Inside of one human lifetime, I'm not that old, okay, we've had this kind of transformation. When I was a little boy, my parents would tell me to finish eating my breakfast because there were children hungry in Europe.
In Europe?
In Europe.
In Europe.
Yep.
Okay, and you could tell the difference between Europeans and white Americans by looking at their teeth.
That's still true.
Yeah, well, not as true. Okay. Okay, and here we are. So this is the greatest miracle, this is the greatest story ever told in secular terms. What has actually happened between World War II and today. Okay, in terms of a quintupling of the world standard of living and the lifting of billions of people out of poverty, starting in the United States and Europe, but extending now into Japan and Korea and India and China and so forth. Okay, the billions of people. And yet, there are people who say this should be turned back. Okay, this is a catastrophe that this has happened. Okay, it's a catastrophe. Okay, the cities are drowning. The flood. Okay, now, I am not a global warming denier. Okay, it is patently true that there has been global warming. It's not so obvious over decade to decade, but if we compare a situation now to that of the early 1800s, you read Charles Dickens' Snowy Winters in London. Okay, it's there, it's clear. Okay, but where are the drowned cities? If you actually look at the coastline of Manhattan, it hasn't retreated at all since 1800. Or Boston, or Baltimore, or London, or any other port that you can name. It's not there. It's counterfactual. There is actually a small rise in sea level of about 1 inch a decade, but that hasn't been enough to matter. So, nevertheless, you have this prejudice, completely counterfactual prejudice, even against stuff that is manifestly beneficial to humanity. Now, the book goes through the whole history of this from Malthus till now. It talks about what happened after Darwin, okay? Where Darwin, who, by the way, I approve of Darwin's theory of evolution, it is true. However, you should know that Darwin's theory of natural selection is completely wrong as applied to human social evolution. Okay, and not just in terms of social policy and social Darwinism, okay, but in terms of what you might call national social Darwinism, okay, which is the theory that humanity progresses by superior nations exterminating inferior nations, which unfortunately became very popular in Germany. It was very ably promoted by Haeckel and various followers of his, and it was already dominant among German elites by World War I, where various, and not just professors, but people in the Kaiser's cabinet and the German general staffs, war is necessary because it eliminates the weak. And by the weak, he didn't mean weak individuals, he meant weak nations. Okay? And if you trace this out, as I do in the book, you will see that Hitler was not terribly original in this respect. And Hitler, though, however, was a follower of anti-humanism. Hitler, 1941, said, "The laws of existence require uninterrupted killing so that the better may live." It's a direct quote. He actually said it the day he issued the order for the extermination of the population of the city of Leningrad, 3 million people. Okay. But these sorts of ideas, once again, limited resources require the extermination of people, in particular people that we don't like. You have, in the United States, in the 20s and 30s, of course, the eugenics movement, which was very similar to Nazism in most of its ideas. It had to be discarded by its sponsors once we went to the war with the Nazis, because it was too clearly aligned with the enemy. However, after the war, people involved came out. They came out under a new banner: population control, environmentalism. Once again, we have to preserve the world's scarce resources, so forth. Once again, making counterfactual predictions. Some people here may remember the tremendous publicity generated by the Club of Rome, 1972, Limits to Growth report, in which they said the world would run out of resources by the year 2000 of everything, oil, copper, zinc, you name it. They'd all run out by the year 2000, and they had scientific authority behind them because they actually had a computer do the calculation. And computers do not make mistakes. So that while these buffoons from the Chamber of Commerce may say that we're not running out of resources, forget it, we are, and therefore, once again, human activities and liberties must be severely constrained. Now, the basic idea of anti-humanism is this. There's only so much of X to go around. And whether that X is food, or living space, or natural resources, or the right to use natural resources, because since the Club of Rome's prediction that we would run out of coal and oil by the year 2000 did not come true, now they're saying that we have to stop using these things not because they're going to run out, but because they are not going to run out. Okay. And of course, in the 1970s, all right, some of you may know or remember that the great threat from industrial development was global cooling. And many of the same people who subsequently became global warming alarmists were then global cooling alarmists. They said, we have out of control population growth and industrial growth, which is being driven by population growth, and it's causing global cooling, it's out of control, put us in control. Later on, you had the warming recommence. They said, well, there's global warming, it's being driven by out of control industry, it's out of control, put us in control. The problem is always different, the solution's always the same. Okay. The solution's always the same. And this is the key objection here. Okay? The current global warming alarm is not about weather. Carbon taxes are not going to change the weather. Carbon taxes will expropriate money, okay? And in particular, they are a very regressive form of taxation, okay? But not only that, and then you have even carbon tax farming, which is what cap and trade is. You understand the concept of tax farming, where a government sells the right to loot people to others. Okay, and that's what issuing carbon permits is, having them bought by speculators who can then sell them to people who actually need them to conduct industrial activities at an inflated price. Okay, so it's that. But the issue here is fundamentally the nature of man. Okay, if the idea is accepted, the fundamental axiom of anti-humanism is accepted, that human beings are destroyers, they are consumers, they're not creators, then every person is fundamentally the enemy of every other person, every nation of every nation, every race of every race, okay? And the purpose of government must be to suppress human aspirations and therefore human liberty. On the other hand, if you, and to mobilize its people for war to try to take the limited resources from those other people over there. Okay. On the other hand, if you understand that humans are fundamentally creators, then every person on earth is fundamentally the potential friend of every other person. Every race of every race, every nation of every nation. And the fundamental purpose of government must be not to suppress liberty, but to protect it at all costs. Thank you. I'd be happy to take questions.